comes from the Spirit with glorious light. Confident living cleanses my soul, giving the Spirit fullest control.
I'm Mike Costello, and I'd like to talk to you in the next few minutes about forward looking. In all of our lives, we're challenged to have enthusiasm and to be willing to look to the future. But so often we get into a mindset or a situation where our mind keeps us from looking forward. In New Thought, in metaphysical studies, we believe that we live in our minds and not in the world. That means that the things that go in our thought process determine the quality and the fiber of our lives. In order to have happy and fulfilling lives, we need to have the ability to look forward, to have a forward-looking philosophy of life. Children are the best example of this. Children are always able to look forward to life. Children are able to choose situations and circumstances and live in them and live in the anticipation of these events in their lives. And even when some negative experiences come, or when parents don't allow children to do all of the things that they would like to do, children still have the ability to draw from within themselves and to look forward to and anticipate things in life. As we grow older and are challenged with the circumstances and situations that face us, we sometimes fail to be as anticipatory. We fail to look forward, and we become more immersed in what's going on around us in the immediate moment, in the immediate situation. And unfortunately, in our lives, some of the things that come into our life experience, some of those things are negative. And so if our thinking becomes negative and clouded, and our thought process becomes clouded and negative, and we continue to be in the midst of the experiences that we have, we fail to anticipate, we fail to look forward, and we fail to have the ability to draw upon the resources of knowing that good and wonderful things are going to happen in our lives. Sometimes things are not as wonderful as we would like them to be, but we need to know in the midst of every circumstance, and even in the midst of the circumstances that are negative and painful and limiting in our lives, that there are things that are going to happen, that there is a friendly universe that embraces us and welcomes us. And in doing that, we must keep our vision, we must keep our view of life clearly focused on the things that are going to come, the things that are ahead of us, and draw upon those resources. I'd like to share with you a few ideas in the art of forward looking. And I call this an art because it is. It is an expression. And these principles, when they are learned, can instruct us and empower us to know that there is something ahead of us and in our future that is bright and hopeful, despite what we may see in the present moment or the present experience. The first step in this art of forward looking, in this ability to condition and train ourselves and our way of thinking to look toward that which is ahead and look forward in our lives, we begin with the concept that we need to accept ourselves without regret or guilt or resentment. We need to accept ourselves as children of God, and this doesn't have to do with the church that you go to or your religious persuasion or background. It has to do with a universal principle that we in metaphysics and in the New Thought movement believe firmly in, and that is that we are all, you, me, and all of the people on this planet, are children of God with universal potential, and that there is a divine intelligence, a spirit, a light, and a life, which some of us call God, that guides and directs us and brings us into a new and wonderful experience every day of our lives. But we have to begin this process of understanding and changing the way that we think by accepting ourselves, and we have to do that without regret and without guilt and without resentment. As human beings, every one of us tend to have regrets. They may have to do with the past. They may even be projected into the future. There may be something that happened in your life or in your family or in your work in the past that has created a regret for you. There may be something that has caused you guilt. There may be something that has caused you deep-seated resentment. And these three things, especially regret and guilt and resentment, keep us from seeing ourselves as worthy of receiving the good, receiving the opportunities that come to all of us through the normal process of life. So we begin the concept, or we begin the process, and we begin the look at this art of forward looking by changing the way that we think about ourselves and by accepting ourselves and giving up the regrets and giving up the guilt and giving up the resentment. Sometimes it's not possible to do that with great ease, but we do it as we begin to condition our mind and our way of thinking. And as we condition our way of thinking, the process of our mind with the mind of God, we see ourselves as God sees us. We see ourselves as perfect and whole children, and we see ourselves as being able to forgive ourselves for those things of the past and to release the resentments of life. The next step is that we accept people in our world. That's the people in our family, in our circle of friends, those with whom we come in contact, that we accept all people that are in our circle at their own level of understanding and life. And we do it without judging them, without criticizing them, and without condemning them. And so what we're really talking about doing is having the same view of other people that we're asking you to have of yourself and that we all need to have of ourselves. And part of that is to understand that everyone in your life and in my life are moving through their life experience, coming to the experiences and the circumstances of life to meet the educational needs that we all have in this life process. Remember that we believe that life is the soul, is the school of the soul. And if life is really a school of the soul, then we're all in the process of learning the lessons that we need to learn through the experiences of our life. And because we're all at different points in the educational process, because we all have come into this life to learn and to grow and to become, we need to understand and accept the fact that the people with whom we come in contact, those that are close to us in our families, those in our neighborhoods, those with whom we work, and those with whom we have casual contact, are all at different levels of life and understanding. And therefore, we need to accept all people without judgment, without criticism, and without condemnation. And then we're able to see them as we are invited to see ourselves. And that is strong and whole children of God. And with that concept, we begin to understand and to truly know the fact that as we are deserving of a bright future, regardless of what circumstance is presenting in our life, they too are deserving of a bright future, and we all move forward, they and we together, in the process of life. And we have to begin by releasing those resentments and guilts, by not judging or criticizing or condemning, and seeing ourselves as brothers and sisters, which is fundamentally a teaching of all religious movements. In this process, we also are invited to do something in our life every week that improves our vision of life. Because remember, we're talking about changing the way that we see life, changing the way that we see ourselves in life, and changing the way that we see others in life, so that we see ourselves and we see others moving forward and moving into an environment that will empower and strengthen and allow us to grow. In order to do that, one of the simple techniques that we talk about often is the ability of taking one thing each week and identifying that one thing as the paramount structure of study and understanding that you are going to embrace to make your life a forward-looking or positive experience. It might be reading a book, to decide this week that you're going to read a book that's going to teach you something that you didn't know before, some new idea or concept. It could be that you're going to decide that this week you're going to begin a technique of relaxation, of visualization or meditation. It could be that this week you're going to write one letter that you didn't write to someone that has hurt you in the past. But choosing to do one thing every week that will improve your life. And that supports the concept of changing the way that you think, and it gives one concrete, tangible item that you can devote yourself to. And at the end of this week, you can choose another, and if you go from week to week and choose these single things in each week, you begin to condition your way of thinking, you begin to improve your life, and you begin to empower yourself. What we're talking about is changing the way that you think and moving your vision out of the circumstance and situation in which you find yourself that may be negative and looking forward with anticipation, just like the child or the children that we talked about when we began this talk, Children have that wonderful ability, whether it's a trip to Disneyland that they're going to make one day, or going for ice cream on Friday or Saturday, or going swimming day after tomorrow. It is the anticipation of looking forward in life to positive and uplifting experiences that empower and strengthen children to get over the little hurts of life. And it's the same principle that empowers and strengthens all of us to deal with the small hurts and the large hurts and difficulties that we face every day. In order to do this, we need to embrace the concept of releasing or letting go of negativity, the negative thoughts that we have, and the dynamic of our mind to embrace the negatives. So we want to let go of negative thinking. We want to appreciate and understand the fact that life is an unfolding process. And the key word in that statement is process, that life is a process, and we move from step to step in the experience of life. And as we move through the process, sometimes there are circumstances and situations that present to you and to me in our lives that cause us discomfort, pain, hurt, or may manifest in the form of illness or even the death and separation of loved ones. And so we need to have the ability to see these experiences of life as processes through which life moves. And we need to also remember, as a very important ingredient to the art of forward looking and forward living and forward thinking, that worry and negative concerns are debilitating, and that worry and negative thoughts will paralyze you and will keep you in the midst of the negative experience itself. And by changing the way that we think, we can change the quality of our lives. We believe that by changing the way that we think and by embracing some concepts and some thoughts of forward looking and living, that we can lift our lives up out of the negative experiences and have a clearer and more profound vision for what life should be and what it ought to be. I don't know what you face today. I don't know what difficulties you are in the midst of. I don't know what your religious faith or tradition is, but I do know that not by changing your faith or changing your religion or changing your church, but by changing the way that you think, you can change the quality and the fiber of your life. And by changing the way that you think, so that you think in a forward-looking way, in an anticipation of life, will empower you and strengthen you and bring you to a peaceful and new way of life. Even though the situations and circumstances may not change immediately, your way of thinking about them can change. And when that change takes place, you begin to unify your thought and your mind with the mind of God. You begin to be and to act and react as the divine creature that you have always been created to be. And you become unified in mind with the mind of God, and you will be guided and directed in ways that you would have never imagined. Ideas will be given to you. Guidance will be presented to your mind, and you will know that the future holds the ability to overcome any circumstance or situation in your life. So I invite you to embrace the concept of examining your way of thinking and moving yourself into the process of forward thinking and anticipation, the anticipation of great good and of wonderful things in your life. We'd like to pause at this point in the program and invite you to join with us in a moment of reflection and prayer. We believe that prayer and meditation are wonderful avenues to open our consciousness to the awareness and peace of God. And so we invite you to join with us now in this reflection. Eternal and loving God, we gather together our hearts and minds in the joy of your divine presence. And we know that in the midst of your presence, we can always look forward to happy tomorrows and to overcoming any circumstance or situation of life. And so we join our thoughts and our hearts and minds in the great forward-looking of life toward the great and wonderful tomorrow and the anticipation of great and wonderful good. We do these things in the name of faith, the name of hope, and the name of love. Amen.
Those were very wonderful ideas you presented on forward-looking, forward living, and that's what we all have to do is think in a forward fashion.
Mm-hmm. I think we talk so often about the importance of living in the now,
Yes.
and we certainly want everyone to live in the now. We need to understand and embrace the reality of where we are. But in the midst of where we are, we need to have also the assurance in our mind and heart that the future is bringing to us opportunities for overcoming. And so while we're in the now, we know that the now is constantly moving. The present moment is constantly moving and expanding the opportunities that we have in life.
Well, yes, and also I heard you saying that it was actually a consciousness of positive, of being positive, as opposed to living in the future. It's more being positive about the future by living in the now more fully. That's what I heard you saying.
And that's very important, to live in the now in a positive way, because if we live in the now in a negative way, we're embracing the concepts that we talked about, resentment
Yes.
and anger and guilt and judgment of others. And so if we live in the now in the midst of those things, then the now becomes such an oppressive place.
Yes, and you also made me realize that on the inner planes of being, we're never judged harshly. And when we're judged by ourselves, not by God, not by the angels. We're not by the great ones on the inner who are masters and more, but rather we judge ourselves. And we often judge ourselves too harshly.
We judge ourselves too harshly and we judge others too harshly.
Yes.
And it is very important to believe, to understand that a fundamental teaching of our faith is exactly what you said, and said so well, that judgment is not something that God renders
Yes.
to us. And many of us have been taught that, and we believe that we're being judged, but in reality we are judging ourselves, and we are not only judging ourselves, but pronouncing judgment and living under our own judgment.
And that makes us miserable, and it makes the people around us miserable. And there's no reason for that, because positive living is so much more enjoyable. And that's how we grow, is to live positively. We grow. I've been very impressed that the young people today are bringing their children up in a different way than my generation did, in a very positive way. It's so wonderful that the young parents today give their children freedom to be themselves. And they don't say all those no's and don'ts, and they don't spank. And it makes me regret that I ever was so harsh with my own children, because now my children are in their 40s, and that was a long time ago. But back then, that's how we were taught, and that's how our parents were taught, and our parents treated us. So I think each generation in this century has shown a great progress in that way.
They have, and of course that fits very well into the reality that we know, that this entire planet is moving into a new age.
Yes.
And as the new age is coming upon us, that the people who have been here and the people who are incarnating at this time are evolving with the planet. And so we have people now who are raising their children who are doing it differently than we would, just as those before us did it differently. And the evolution of training children, I think, has come to the point of parents being able to see the fact that we have been teaching our children some of the wrong thinking that has created the problems that we have in the world.
Yes, the negative thinking, the negative aspect of our parenting has made the children be negative, where if we've had positive aspects in our parenting, then the children are more positive, and they're more happy with themselves. I know my two little grandchildren slept overnight at my home last weekend, and it was just remarkable that they were not there with any other relatives but me, and they don't see me that often. But they were so wonderful, and they were not just quiet because they were timid or shy. They were not timid or shy. They played all over the house, and they did all the things they wanted to do, but they were just perfect children. And there's another young man who spends time at my home who's 7 years old, and he is in that same category. And I'm always reminded when I'm with these young children today how we've shown real progress.
We have, and we've given them so many wonderful opportunities, and their way of thinking is totally different than our way was when we were their age. And part of it has to do with the world in which they're growing up, with computers and information. They're far brighter than we were, and they will be brighter than we are, and their understanding will be more profound than ours. And I think part of that is that children of this generation, the generation being born and coming into life now, are seeing life and seeing others in a different way, in a much more tolerant way, and in a much more universal way. And of course that just fits so beautifully into the shifting of the consciousness that we see taking place on the planet.
Yes, that is such an important aspect, because we know that we're living in the time of greatest change the world has ever known. And we also know that how we react makes a big difference in the changes overall, because we're each important and we're each a very necessary part of the whole. And so the way we act reflects on all of mankind. And it's hard to remember that we're each equally important.
We're each equally important, and we're each at different levels in our soul understanding. Now, that's not to say, and we talk a lot about this old soul versus
Yes,
young soul,
we
and we're
don't
not
like
talking
that.
about that at all. But everyone is at a different level of learning the lessons that they have agreed, and that they, together with those on the inner, have agreed that they need to experience in this life. And we can't see that, and we need not see that. And because we can't see it, we need to respect the fact that everyone is the same, that we are the same as
Yeah.
everyone else. So we're all on equal footing, if you will. We're all children of God with divine potential, but everyone is experiencing and behaving in a different way according to his or her need. And
Yes.
sometimes that behavior seems to be damaging from our perception, but we need to really move away from that judgment.
Yes. And there is the truth that many people have lived on other planets in between lives on this planet, and I know that that's true. And so then they would react differently to Earth living. And so I think what you're really saying there is we need to be very careful not to be judgmental of others, to not judge others by our own standards, because there is no way we can do that with integrity and honesty, because we don't know, as you said, what they came in to work through. We don't know what baggage they brought with them. And we don't know how they're helping others in a way that's so very viable, but we wouldn't be able to see how they're helping those people around them.
And we need to be especially careful of that with our young people and children,
Yes.
because so often we want to form and control them, and they need to make choices and make decisions
Yes.
of their own.
Yes, and I do think that the parents are giving them that opportunity more fully than parents in the past. It's such a wonderful thing that we're living in this time of change, and sometimes we just can't get our breath because everything moves so quickly. But it's an exciting time to be alive, and there are those people who think that we're going to be getting more information from those on the inner planes of being, those from other planets, and I believe that we are too.
Well, those on the inner and those in spirit and God, that divine power is speaking to us always.
Yes, yes. Well, there's that writer Sheldon Neidl and Virginia Essene who wrote the book "You're Becoming a Galactic Human." I've been very taken with that book because they give such viable information, and information that I know to be true from my own meditations and from what I receive in my own meditations. And that's the only way we can truly judge other writings or other ideas, if it rings true to us, to what we already know and what we've gained from our own inner teachers. And so they're saying that there's going to be spaceships landing in Mexico. Why Mexico? Because the Mexican media is more open to new things and to new ideas.
And having that openness is where the message comes from the other side, because it will always come where it is to be received.
That's right. And that's the way it is with individuals. Some individuals are able to, for example, channel information. Well, what is channeling? It's just listening to those on the inner and bringing through that inner voice that one is hearing. And some people do it in different ways and put fancy connotations to it, but that's all it is. And many of us have meditated all our lives practically, and we receive information, and that's the only true way of, to me, that's the only true way of stepping forward and being forward looking, is to look to the inner for our own guidance, for our own personal guidance. And if someone tells us something we are questioning, then ask in our own meditation for deeper information, and we'll get it.
But also be open and receptive to receiving information from the inner all the time.
Yes.
And in order to do that, we have to get our thinking or our mind process out of the experience that we have, and allow that, the Holy Spirit, if you will, to speak to our mind.
Yes, that's a very important aspect, that the spiritual aspect is so important in our lives, and it has nothing to do with churchianity. It has nothing to do with religiosity. it has to do with that spiritual inner core of us. And every person has that spiritual aspect of being, and it's known by many names. Some call it the monad, the God spirit indwelling, and that's what we call it. And it's so important that we be aware of the God self within. And some people say my high self. There's a lady I know who talks about the things she receives, information she receives, and she says, I said to my high self, and she talks about her high self as if it's another person, which is somewhat amusing. But on the other hand, she's truly going within and looking for information and getting confirmation for what she needs in her work and in her everyday living, and it's worked for her.
And the name isn't important.
No.
And you know, so often we are so wrapped up today with names, and people are bothered about what we call God or don't call God, or whether we address him or her properly, and whether we have inclusive language. And I think that is another, it's a personal issue. And the importance is that we understand and connect with that presence and not what we name it to be.
Exactly. It's the feeling within our heart. As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. And so it's how we think, it's how we feel, it's our intent. And that's such an important aspect of being, our intent. If our intent is to help another person, then we will indeed lift that person. If for no other way than just the vibratory rate we help to lift. And if our intent is to attune ourselves with God the whole, with Creator God, then we attune with that aspect of being.
And our intent always should be for the highest and best, and to open our consciousness and awareness to the divine, to speak to us and to speak to all people.
Yes. And so, and as we look, as you said so well, in a forward way, that's what we're doing. We're looking within ourselves and then stepping out into the world, doing whatever we need to do.
Absolutely. And Reverend Freelander and I have been sharing with you ideas for confident living and the challenge of looking forward and allowing the Spirit of God to speak to you. And we hope you found this information to be useful. We look forward to seeing you next time.
Living banner of might comes from the